All right, good morning. Welcome to the October meeting of the Asheville Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. I'm Andy Barnett, I'm the co-chair. We're a 13-person committee whose primary function is to advise the city leadership about affordable housing policy issues and priorities for city funding. We work with the Housing Community Development Committee of the City Council to forward our recommendations to the full City Council. All committee members and staff are now participating in person. We're streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked in the committee page. You can also watch the meeting on the city's YouTube channel, either live or recorded. The public can listen to the meeting live by calling 855-925-2801, then enter code 7663. It's nice to see a number of folks in the room today. It feels a little bit like the old days to have some guests here with us. So we will take public comment at the end of the meeting, but since I assume that the folks that are here are not here just because this is the hottest gig in town, but to give public comment. So we have a couple of big agenda items today, and since I don't know which ones you might be here to make comment on, we'll take a short period of public comment after each one of those agenda topics, just so that we're not tying your whole morning up, but we'll take comment at the end as well. Because we'd love to have you stay around as long as you can, but respect your time. We also accept public comment by email or voicemail, but they need to be made by 5 p.m. the day before the meeting. So next we'll move on to our roll call. Starting with Scott Adams.
Present.
David Bartholomew.
Here.
Barry Bialik.
Here.
Chris Day.
Here.
Paul Heathman.
Here.
Tara Irby is not here. Brian Methvin.
Here.
Dewana Little. Babs Phillips. Nuena Smith.
Good morning.
And our council liaison, Councilmember Antoinette Mosley. You're here as well. Staff present, we have Sasha Rentudsky from city staff. We have a quorum for the meeting, so we'll jump in with our first agenda item, the approval of meeting minutes from our September meeting. So just everybody had a chance to take a look at those. Any questions or concerns about the minutes from our last meeting?
The only thing I see is the call. The call to order says it was by Margie. I don't think she was here last meeting.
Sorry.
Good catch.
I'll change that too.
If there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes with that correction. Motion.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right. It's always good to get one thing out of the way. So we are starting this morning with something that has been we've been talking about and working on, and was the top priority on AHAC's work plan for this year, updating the city's affordable housing plan. That is the affordable housing plan, creating it, maintaining it, helping to implement it, revising it from time to time is really the core of what AHAC's charter is all about. And so it's nice to be digging back into that, and I'm really excited to welcome Jara Smith, the project manager from Enterprise, who's going to give us a little bit of an update on where they are working with the affordable housing plan. Jara's heading up the team from Enterprise Community Partners, who'll be working with our community to draft our new affordable housing plan. So, Jara, welcome.
Excellent. Can you all hear me just fine? Great. Well, thank you so much for having me this morning. My name is Jara Smith. I am the Program Director for Equitable Housing Solutions at Enterprise Community Partners. Today, I'm going to give you all just a very brief overview of who Enterprise Community Partners and Enterprise Advisors, my department, is. Then we'll talk about the plan itself, the process, where we see AHAC playing a crucial role in the plan, and then we have a lot of time for question and discussion afterwards. So, Enterprise Community Partners is a national nonprofit based in Maryland. Our mission is to make home a place of power, belonging, and pride. And through that, we primarily focus on three overarching goals. The first is increasing the housing supply. As we all know, there is a critical shortage of affordable housing available not only in Asheville but nationally, and so we advocate for and invest in increasing affordable housing supply. Additionally, because there has been decades, if not longer, of systemic racism in the housing industry, we center racial equity in all of our work. And last, we build resilience and upward mobility by preparing communities for the unpredictable. Enterprise Advisors is my department, and we're the mission-driven consultancy that works within Enterprise Community Partners. And through those three primary goals, we have spent the last decade working with over 800 partners, over 500 communities, to build new housing service delivery platforms, to build new financing tools, to come up with new affordable housing strategies, and to build strong partnerships. And we managed to work in all 50 states and 2 U.S. territories in that time frame. So the affordable housing plan itself. So I wanted to just set the stage with big picture goals that we've, as a team, identified as the primary goals for the affordable housing plan, and this was taken directly from the RFP. I try not to read off of slides, but because these are the words of Asheville, I want to make sure that I articulate them properly. So the first goal is to develop a roadmap and to improve existing housing programs, implement new policies, and allocating future funds for affordable housing. It's also to preserve existing affordable housing that's threatened by the increasing housing costs in the city. As a part of that, we need to center communities that are most affected by the housing crisis and address broader community needs during the planning process. And then perhaps most importantly, we want to ensure that city resources are producing equitable outcomes that we identify additional opportunities to leverage city resources for advancing racial equity. One thing that I felt when we were awarded this project is just how unique this opportunity is. We've worked with cities all over the country. Lots of cities don't even do a housing plan. Even fewer do an affordable housing plan, and even less center racial equity as a part of it. So this feels like a genuine opportunity for us to be, frankly, a national model. And I don't want to take that opportunity for granted. So I'm encouraging my team, I'm encouraging the city of Asheville to be bold, be innovative, and be a leader in this space, because I think this is a real opportunity for us to do so. So getting down into the nitty-gritty, these are the five primary tasks outlined in our scope of work. The first task, project management, is pretty boring. It's our weekly meetings with the city and our internal calls, just coordinating our efforts. We had our kickoff in late August. More importantly, the second task, community and stakeholder engagement. This will occur iteratively over the entire course of the project. It's our qualitative analysis. We'll be doing stakeholder interviews with everyone from city and county staff to housing service providers, educators, researchers, developers, both nonprofit and for-profit, small and large. We'll be doing in-person engagement and virtual engagement as well. And a big part of this particular task is we're going to develop a resident engagement roundtable to meet for this group. And their primary responsibility will be related to community engagement. Their role will be to help us design our in-person and virtual community engagement efforts and actually recruit people to come to our events and participate. One thing that I think separates the Resident Engagement Roundtable from other projects or other housing plans is we are trying to make sure that the membership of the Resident Engagement Roundtable is made up of those who will actually be impacted by the affordable housing plan. We want, community leaders and community voices there, but we want to make sure that this is genuinely grounded in those who are living the crisis of not being able to find affordable housing. We don't know exactly the makeup of the Resident Engagement Roundtable yet. We're hoping to have that fully solidified by the end of this month. But we're seeing that as a really crucial part of our plan to make sure that we're actually reaching populations who are maybe not normally part of the planning process. We want to make sure that we're bringing in marginalized and disenfranchised communities from the get-go. The third task is the housing needs assessment. That's more of our quantitative analysis. We'll be looking at everything from housing and market trends to demographic changes. We'll be as a part of our work to center racial equity, we'll be disaggregating our data by race to where that data is available. And we're hoping to have that assessment done by the end of this year. We are also going to assess the city's current toolbox, the 5 primary tools that the city has to incentivize affordable housing: LUIG, the Housing Trust Fund, fee rebates, the city land initiative, and bond funding, to identify how those resources can be most effectively utilized to produce affordable housing and make sure that they are, in fact, reducing racial disparities in the city and not exacerbating them. As part of that, we're going to look at each of those policies using what's known as a racial equity impact assessment. We're using a model developed by an organization called Race Forward, which is intended to look at the efficacy of programs and tools, but also to do it through a lens of racial equity, to determine and identify where there may be instances of unintentional institutionalized racism that might exacerbate existing racial disparities in the city. And then last, once we complete all these assessments, we'll actually be synthesizing our findings and developing strategies and a roadmap for implementation via our affordable housing plan. I should say this is my team. Chris Kizzy, our vice president, is a member as well. He will be dropping in occasionally when advice is needed. Bithya Ratnasamy, she's the director of Equitable Housing Solutions at Enterprise. She's leading the community and stakeholder engagement initiative. I, Jarrah Smith, am leading the assessment of the City Tools Initiative. My colleague Erica Foster, our program director, will be leading the housing needs assessment, and she'll be supported by Zach Patton, who will be specifically focusing a little bit more on the market analysis element of it all. He also has a broad range of other areas of expertise, including preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing, so that's something that I plan on bringing him in with as well. So as for the breaking down these tasks month by month, because those are not all happening discretely one after the other, they're often happening really overlapping, I figured it'd be helpful to break down kind of the major milestones that this plan will be accomplishing month by month. So the top box are those major things that myself and Sasha's team are going to be working on, and then the boxes below are where we see AHAC playing a crucial role in those particular months. So in August, we had our kickoff. We started to develop some initial research questions in our framework, and we started to get some initial data from the city and some documents for us to review so that we can just get smarter on the housing conditions in Asheville. In September, we continued to do that document exchange, and we started to plan this visit. I've had the privilege of being here the last couple of days and have been able to meet with many wonderful residents of Asheville that have really helped me grow my understanding of the housing landscape here. We've also started to do some stakeholder mapping, and we've started to do our city and housing needs assessments as well. Again, those are just getting underway though, but that was the focus of September. So October, we have this lay of the land visit where I'm here. We did a stakeholder mapping exercise, which was one of the first steps that we wanted to take to develop the resident engagement roundtable. So this month will be spent identifying potential candidates for the resident engagement roundtable and starting to recruit them and bringing them into the process. We also plan to update our community engagement plan once we have the resident engagement roundtable solidified, because it's their mission to help us design community engagement in a way that actually engages folks most likely to be impacted by the plan. We'll also start to plan our next visit in December, where we'll have at least a couple days here. We're going to do some in-person engagement events and a strategy work session with staff, and we're going to continue working on all of the assessments that I mentioned already. So AHAC in particular, I'm here today to solicit your thoughts on priorities, your research questions, resources that you think would be advantageous for us to have as we start to investigate the housing conditions in Asheville. And so we'll get to that in just a few minutes. In November, we could theoretically start doing some virtual engagement activities. We want to make sure that the resident engagement roundtable is up and running by then before we do so, and we'll continue to plan our more active in-person engagement activities for December. We will also start to kind of wrap up our housing needs assessments, start to wrap up our city tool assessments as well, at least in an ideal scenario, because in December is when we're going to start to actually write our reports and identify some key findings from each one of those assessments. As for AHAC's role in November, we would love your help identifying and helping to connect us with key stakeholders who we should be interviewing, and also helping to recruit for our December in-person engagement activities. In December itself, like I said, we're going to have a few days here where we're going to do in-person engagement activities and a strategy work session, and we would love your help to actually participate in those as well and get your thoughts and feedback through the process. I should also say 2023 this year, our major kind of bucket that we're working on, this is the research and discovery phase, right? That's why we're doing the stakeholder interviews, we're doing the data assessment, we're looking at the tools, we're starting to dip our toes into community engagement. But really the next couple of months is just us getting smarter and learning about the Asheville's housing conditions. Now next year is when we start to move and pivot into strategy development. So in January, once we've completed our assessments, we're planning on presenting our key findings to the team, to the staff, to get their initial thoughts on what we came up with. In that same time frame, we're planning to come up with an outline for what the actual affordable housing plan will look like. We'll give you a break in January. I know you have other things on your docket that aren't just the affordable housing plan. So then in February, we're going to start to actually draft some recommendations and some strategies after we receive feedback from staff and from you all about our key findings. Our plan is to present those key findings to you at your first meeting in September, so we can make sure that our analyses are grounded in reality and true to the experience that you all and the Resident Engagement Roundtable have experienced in Asheville. We'll also start planning for a March in-person visit. We're going to ideally wrap up any final stakeholder interviews, because perhaps after our discussion with you and with staff in January and February, we discover there's still some stones we need to unturned. But really the ideal scenario is that in March, we're gonna have an in-person event where we have some pretty fleshed out recommendations and implementation strategies that we wanna take to you all and take to the community to make sure those are reflective of your own priorities and the city's needs. With that feedback and validation, we can actually start to draft the actual plan in April, which we'll then be presenting to City Council in May. So here's the time for discussion. I'm happy to take any questions you have about enterprise or about the process, but I'd really love to get your thoughts on these three questions. What research questions do you have, and what resources are available to us, whether it's data sets or potential interviewees or existing studies? Where do you see areas for creativity in the affordable housing policy? And this one is a bigger one that I think I'll be coming back to you again and again about, but I want to know your thoughts on how do we evaluate the success of the city's current set of tools. I can start off by taking any questions you have about the process, but I also absolutely welcome anyone to dive in for any one of these three questions.
I'm bold. We had previously formed two work groups that were doing some of the groundwork for this that I think needs to get connected into the study.
Great.
I was on the build group, and we came up with reviewed and discussed a bunch of barriers to creating affordable housing, and interviewed lots of people in city and county and municipal staff to be able to uncover what some things can be done. So, for example, the best one I think is our working with the Metropolitan Sewer District. They can't just extend lines by themselves to create new affordable, unlocked land that cannot be developed today because there's no sewer access. So it's being able to tie, I think, into what these groups have done, and that might be an activity you're thinking in 2023. So to connect into those groups, you can build off that work, and it might also, you might want to re-interview some of the people that we already talked to if you have follow-up questions for them on some of those ideas.
Okay. Is there a report or a study, or should I just meet with?
Yes, I can provide you basically a sort of a running summary of our notes from the rough year and a half of interviews that we had. So.
Excellent. Great.
And then the other group was our Connect group, which Andy led. I don't know if you want to speak to what you guys, you have a summary, well, you have a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, we can share those as well. And happy to work with you on connecting to the people that we connected with.
Great.
As the Connect group. Other questions or thoughts for
Jared? Welcome, and thanks. I'm so excited to see this happening. Yeah, and I think to Brian and Andy's point, it'd be good to. There's a lot of research that was done that kind of, especially that outlines some of the barriers, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things that makes Asheville unique is that we're a city, but we don't have a lot of the advanced infrastructure like other cities, and then we don't have government like some of those little things like, well, the MSD can't extend their own lines, so we have basically poor stormwater structures that aren't mapped, that are most of them on private property. We have sewer lines that some of them are still like terracotta pipes in really poor shape, and that they don't have the ability to extend them themselves, so it all gets put on the cost of a private project. We have water lines, we don't even talk about our water system, but we have water lines that, many of the streets in the city have subpar, they're still inch lines.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So even doing individual bills now, sometimes like an individual water meter gets turned down because of poor capacity. And then of course we have topography.
Right.
And then because of the topography, we have a lot of conflicts in other rules, like, fire department trucks have to be a certain slope.
Yeah.
But, that half our city is, not
Right.
ready. So there's a lot of conflicts, and I think that will be valuable, information. And I think it's, making sure, like, as much as like the stakeholders of those who need housing, making sure you actually speak to some of the builders of this,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
they're the ones on the front line,
Right.
who are identifying these are the barriers why we can't do this. Lots of people want to build affordable housing here.
Right.
There's lots of reasons why it can't happen, and we need to, I think, kind of working on those. This is why we focus so much time at that build committee.
Great.
The other thing I'll just share about the city funding, especially we're seeing this more and more now because of interest rates. Currently, none of our initiatives are grants. So everything, like the Housing Trust Fund is exclusively a loan. Luigi is a tax rebate. So there's no grants at all, and that really makes projects difficult. And the only time a grant can happen is like, example, there was a Housing Trust Fund application this last round that they asked City Council to make it a grant, but there's no process to do a grant.
Okay.
And I think that's an important because, a low interest, a 1% loan only does so much. It's just cheaper money. It's not actually reducing the cost of a project.
Right, exactly. Land acquisition, like for affordable developers, often requires some kind of grant or some kind of significant land subsidy just because, yeah. Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to round out this line of questions because I feel like both Brian and Barry's comments were sort of around sort of what's in scope beyond the 5 things that you've listed up there that are sort of our direct, locally controlled incentive programs. Obviously, the local regulatory barriers and how do we make it easier for affordable housing, but also, to what extent will our federal, the investment of our federal affordable housing dollars be included in this plan? I mean, I know there's some specific things around that, and this seems like a great, particularly for CDBG, there's a requirement for community input around the investment strategy for CDBG. This seems like a great way to really make that process more robust. So what's the thinking right now on how this dovetails with federal investments?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, federal money is where a lot of affordable housing comes from. So that's absolutely an integral part of this analysis. In fact, even yesterday, Sasha and I were talking about, how this area may be, I don't know, for instance, I guess I'd learned from the builders work group, but I don't know how many chodos there are in the area, but chodos get access to additional home funds potentially. So, this is just to say my mind is already machinating on how federal resources can make their way to the city. And ideally figuring out ways to leverage those federal resources in collaboration with the county or in collaboration with the Housing Trust Fund, whatever the case may be. But yes, we're absolutely going to be looking at federal funding and the best practices for that as part of this as well.
I wonder if you could speak to just a moment between the affordable housing covers both the rental market and
Sure.
home ownership market. So
Yeah.
in terms of the scope of the study,
Yeah.
is it an equal 50-50 mix? or a focus, or are you focusing more on one or the other?
That's a great question. And I would say that I don't have the answer to it yet because I think we're going to try and let the housing needs assessment inform a lot of that for us. We're trying to identify what is the crucial unmet need in the city, right? Affordable for whom? That is to say, we will be focusing on both. You cannot build wealth and intergenerational wealth, and you cannot advance racial equity without talking about home ownership. That said, there also needs to be more rentals and more affordable rentals. I mean, I've heard a lot over the past couple days, particularly about service industry workers who just cannot find a place to affordably live in the city. So we'll be addressing both. The degree to which we focus on one or the other, I think, is going to be dependent on what we discover in our housing needs assessment. That said, I would love to hear from you all what your priorities are or what your thoughts are on that relative level of focus, if you have any initial thoughts on that.
Sure. One thing about the service industry workers, because that's one of the issues we have. So this committee focuses specifically on affordable housing up to 80% AMI, and so the service workers. So most of our programs are not. This committee does not focus on workforce. I know we don't like the term, but technically what's referred to as workforce housing, because it's just not. It's not within the scope of what this committee or what city has any funding to do. So
Sure.
That's a big gap. That I guess that is a good question. Is that something that this affordable housing plan will look at, or not? Because it's not something that city has any really funding programs or policies for. So
You mean for those above the 80% AMI?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't think that we're going to be limiting our scope to below 80%. Yeah. I mean, if we discover through our needs assessment that that's where the greatest need is, then that's where we'll focus our energy. But at this point, we're certainly not making any judgments on which AMI groups we'll be focusing on. And to that point, there's been discussions about using AMI as a centralizing metric in itself, right? Because a lot of people don't relate with what an AMI is. When you say workforce housing, people think service workers, but in reality, those service workers are not making workforce housing incomes, right? So the way that we may describe it in the plan is more of a profile of what someone might be living like in a certain income bracket without actually specifically naming that AMI, or at least using that as the primary delineator for what their needs may be, if that makes sense. But just to restate, we're not limiting our work to just 80% or below AMI.
What term do you use? Because hackles go up. That term, workforce housing. What term? What do you use for the?
I mean, we at Enterprise don't have a specific policy for that, but we share the concerns about that particular term of workforce housing. I did like middle income housing. That's a good one too. But frankly, we would be happy to investigate using other terminology that you all feel would be most appropriate for Asheville.
So is that, can I then just so I understand as I watch this unfold. So if your study is going to be based on all income levels and city programs, and what the program, the department focuses on is 80% and below, is that, how does those get reconciled? How much focus will the city want on, if all of the programs and all the tools that exist are only for that, is, I don't know, how much work to put on that if there's not appetite from above to change some of those programs? Because traditionally the push has been 80% with how do we push it lower?
Right.
We actually want more 60%. So really that above 80%, almost is almost really removed from the discussion from any program and from most of what we do as a committee. So
right.
That might just be something to clarify so there's not too much time spent on that.
That makes a lot of sense. But I think to your point, the fact that all those tools are for 80 to 100%, 120% AMI, without getting ahead of myself, because we haven't done the assessments yet, would indicate that we probably will spend a good amount of time focusing on those below 80%.
And I think this has come up in our conversations over the last 2 days, and I think we've talked with several different folks about, we're limited in our funding statutorily, but we're not limited in zoning incentives. Maybe there's a zoning incentive and for that income group. That's what the county is doing with their, zoning ordinance. So, I mean, and maybe there's partnerships, like, I know some organizations talking about funding that income band that aren't restricted in the same way we are, so I feel like we'll be looking at all of that as well. Sorry, Scott.
No, it's all right. I was literally just pointing to you since you had a question.
So, a question about how you will derive priorities. So, in the process, you're gathering data. I think many of us have insights in the community. We have a crisis in affordable housing for people, below 60% AMI.
Yeah.
We definitely have a problem, from 60 to 80, from 80 to 120.
Right.
And then we have a problem in home ownership. It's very difficult for people to get into the market.
Right.
So I know there's lots of people who have lots of needs.
Right.
How do you make the Sophie's choice?
That's a great way of putting it. It's a great question. And honestly, it's not up to me and my team to make those priorities for you all. We're going to be, when we come back with our strategies and our ideas in February and March, that's going to be the primary prioritization process, right? We're going to be coming to you to validate our findings, make sure that our strategies are baked in reality and they're not just pie in the sky dreams, and then hearing from you all what you think would be the most likely strategies or the most effective strategies to tackle early on, whether it's by prioritizing those who are facing the greatest need, or prioritizing those policies that are most feasibly implemented in the short term, or some machination of the two. But this is all to say, we're going to come up with our ideas and our recommendations and our thoughts, but invariably it's going to be up to you all and to the community and the residents of Asheville to determine what priorities need to be addressed first.
Surely you all have some ideas about creativity in the affordable housing space, or any of these questions. I feel like this is a good chance for you to, so don't be shy.
Yeah, I'll jump in on your first question around research questions.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a persistent lack of data around preservation of affordable housing, both, how we're tracking units that are likely to reach the end of their affordability period and need to be resubsidized. I think there's also, we tend to know too late when a naturally occurring affordable housing development goes market rate.
Yeah, right.
So that we don't have a chance to put community strategies toward intervention. I also think we massively underestimate the scale of the need for investment in home repair and improvement and sort of addressing substandard quality. So I think part of that is a data problem. There's just not data sets that include housing condition that are conducted at, sampled at the local scale, without having you guys go door to door and spend a whole lot of time doing original research. Like, are there some methodologies that can help us get at, housing condition or the likelihood of the loss of predictive tools around the loss of affordable
Yes.
units?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so glad that you brought those up. I wrote them down, and we're definitely going to look into those. So as far as tracking affordability periods, that is something that we do regularly. I personally am not an expert on how to do that, but my colleague Erica does it all the time. She just did it for the city of Hyattsville. So that's something that and it's in our scope. We plan on investigating the existing deed-restricted affordable housing and examining when those periods of affordability are expected to expire, so you can prioritize addressing those that are most likely to hit market rate sooner than later. Preserving naturally occurring affordable housing is, of course, a really challenging nut to crack. There are ways to evaluate the relative development pressure within submarkets and try to understand that. Zach Patton, a member of our team, built a pretty significant preservation toolkit. If you want to look it up, it's called Preservation Next. It's specifically for Miami and Atlanta, but the whole idea is figuring out how to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, how to build capacity for local developers to purchase and rehab those naturally occurring affordable housing units and maintain affordability. So there's a huge project that Zach undertook about a year or two ago that we're absolutely planning on feeding into this as a part of that. And as far as housing conditions are concerned, that one is also difficult. I mean, code violations is one way. I don't know what level the city tracks code violations, but like that's one way that we can look at housing condition.
Well, just in a market like ours where there's such a scarcity of affordable housing, code violations go dramatically unreported because
Yes.
people are afraid to lose their housing.
Yes, I know.
So, I mean, that's a tool, but it's a fairly unreliable tool.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, it is. You are describing a national frustration with not being able to evaluate housing condition. It's easier for cities that are able to create rental registries, have proactive rental inspections. I believe that's not allowable in the city, unfortunately. But the other mechanism, of course, is speaking to residents who are living in those housing units and understanding what conditions they're living in and what they're hearing from their neighbors and their friends and members of their community. But in terms of quantifiable data, that is something that we are faced with as a challenge in any community that we work with. But if you have any ideas, I'm all ears.
I mean, American Housing Survey is sort of the
Right.
best tool I've found on that, but it's,
Yeah.
it's national.
Right.
You know, it's a national sample, so.
Right. Yes.
I rely on my colleagues here to look at it through the macro eye scope because they're the experts. But I'm the expert when it comes to the micro for those of us who are grassroots and live in these communities.
Yeah.
And feel that we are not being heard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, my heart is like, woo, woo, woo. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. But I want to speak for those of us who live in these affordable housing situations, who do not feel safe in our homes, who are paying extraordinary amounts of money to rent because we are trying to keep our families safe, but don't feel safe where we live. And also, too, for those of us who may, get a new job and get a little extra salary, but every time you go back to your site manager or landlords, you have to report these recertifications and the little bit of money that you finally got to say, yes, thank you, Jesus, I got this salary.
Right.
But now it's going back into affordable housing for a situation that should not even be charged that amount of money.
Right.
First of all, is that I think a lot of times when people think about affordable housing, they don't think about us who live in those housings who need closet space, who need walls that you don't hear your neighbor next door screaming at their husband or wife, or the next neighbor who's yelling at their children for whatever reason, I need to know that when I open my back door that my children can play in the grass and not worry about pit bulls biting them or any other things, or if I open my front door, that I'm not walking into marijuana smoke or a big old party, So
Yeah.
just that I want us to start thinking about creativity in affordable housing is creating spaces that we can build community.
Yes.
Creating spaces where, I know a lot of times people talk about mixed housing, but I know some people don't want that mixed housing. But, some of us we are friendly. I'm a friendly neighbor. You're friendly to me, but if you're not friendly to me, I won't be friendly, But my children are lovely, And I would love for us to build a community where we all can raise our children. I could walk to my job down here, but if I have to drive in, that's fine, but not these spaces where I can't decorate. Right now, I feel like I live in my storage unit, and it doesn't make me feel excited to live, I feel depressed every day. So I have to push past that in order to come and speak up for my community. But there's a lot of people in these spaces who are vibrant, who want to give back to our community, but we live in depressive states. And I hate that Asheville has so many people who are wealthy that don't give back, or some people do give back, but there's a lot of us who are hurting.
Yeah.
And we need some help.
Yeah.
And it's 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, that's good, but people are suffering right now.
Yeah.
And it's about to become winter.
Yeah.
So what are we gonna do about these people who are homeless? There's a lot of people coming to Asheville right now and they don't have housing. You know, I was talking to one of the women who worked in Asheville City Schools. I'm sorry if I'm ranting, you guys,
Yeah.
but it's Asheville City Schools, and she was saying that the enrollment rate has went up, but a lot of these families are not reporting any houses. Some people are living in rest stops. So people are flocking to Asheville because we market it as a beautiful place to be in the mountain.
Yeah.
It is beautiful, it is.
Right.
You know, I live in Philadelphia and New York City, so I understand like urban living, but you know, I'm like, now, at first I was like, oh, I miss Philly so much. But now that I'm here, I'm like, Asheville is really beautiful. I
Yeah.
love it. But it's racial disparities is on a high. You know, I don't know, you know, certain flags, I'm like, should I go in the store or not? I'm like, what should I do? But at the same time, we need these spaces for our babies. So I know I'm ranting, but I have to speak for our community. We're hurting, we need some help, and I'm happy you guys are here.
Thank you, and thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, Nwenda. Other thoughts for Sarah?
On the ideas of creative ideas, just building off of what was just said, you know, I do think Asheville is attracting a disproportionate number of wealthy individuals. And I don't think the impact that brings to the community isn't being captured through our property tax system. And so we may need to look at other mechanisms to ensure that all of our housing stock and our available land just isn't taken up with wealthy retirees to the detriment of the local community, who needs to both support them in terms of restaurants and service industry workers and activities that they're coming here for. On the topic of creative ideas in other communities as well, some communities have basically rental voucher subsidies that they're offering to individuals under different qualification mechanisms to ensure that those who are struggling the most, families with children, can get additional subsidies beyond payments to help them afford better quality housing. And lastly, I do think we need to do more as a community to track the larger naturally affordable housing complexes so that we're reaching out to the ownership groups so that we can be in front of any redevelopment, because a lot of these are owned by out-of-town private equity firms, and the decisions are made 12 months in advance to, you know, redo them and raise rents.
Right.
And once those decisions are made, we find out about it when the cranes arrive, and that's too late to do anything about it.
Right.
So if we're not being proactive and reaching out to them and letting them know what programs are available to preserve that housing, they're not going to approach us.
Right, right. That's such a good point, and I'm just thinking of Zach's preservation toolkit, and acquisition is, of course, the first step, and a lot of that is being proactive, identifying those properties that are being threatened with either being flipped or, you know, market rate rents rising. So thank you for bringing up that point.
Certainly, the creativity, one thing I'm just thinking, like when I look at all of our programs and have seen the Luigi and the Housing Trust and the fee rebates and all that stuff, and we like to create programs that are very specific, and we like to create them so targeted, and there's so much, but what we've done in so many ways is they've been micromanaged to death, where they have they don't work in reality. So so I was just trying to think, like, in the creativity, rather than even have any kind of, like, there can be guidelines, but what other cities have come up with programs where, like, those who are trying to build can actually put together very flexible proposals and say, for this to work, I need this, and then I need this. Because I look at, like, this last round of housing trust fund applications that was approved, there was 3 of them, none of them really followed or met any of the true housing trust fund standards. Like, one asked for the housing trust fund to turn to a grant to make the project work. The one I did that was awarded, I basically created for homeownership a down payment assistance program that the city doesn't have. So how do we actually give the flexibility and the creativity to the people who are really trying? Because what happened is we actually have tools that don't work. And like looking through, like I was reading through like the recommendations on this agenda of the Housing Trust Fund changes, I'm like, well, that's just going to make it even harder to use. So actually, how do you actually create a much more flexible tool that then has the ability for individual proposals to say, this is what I need for this project to work? Because every site is different, every size of project is different, who it's trying to help is different, And we actually, our tools are too narrow. And we actually, and there are a lot of people who really care and are trying here, from small companies to big companies to individual people maybe in their backyard. And we don't have the tools to do that, but they might offer up the tools.
Right.
And I think we should be more open to being flexible with that, rather than actually narrowing the window and say, this is the only thing you can do with. And I'd love to see what other cities have maybe tried some of that.
Okay.
Because we don't have anything like that here.
Right.
And I think that would actually help.
Great. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
We have a few folks on the committee that haven't had a chance to jump in. I'm going to see if any of those folks want to get in before we open the floor and try to get you out of here on time with our agenda. So Chris or David or Paul, anybody who hasn't had a question or a thought.
I'm just leading.
I can just add to what Barry said about our tools. They're often focused on like big projects. Obviously has a big impact, but but it'd be great to be able to see tools for individuals who are creating 1 or 2 units.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm just excited you're here, and I'm sure I'll have comments once I see some of your findings.
Great.
What you find from the community.
Thank you.
So just a quick follow-on question. So in terms of research questions, I know I'm actually on an advisory working group for a missing middle housing study that's supposed to be finishing out end of the year. Do you anticipate, I guess, having some overlap with that, at least in terms of sort of their zoning audit and anything that's coming out of that? And in terms of your housing needs assessment, is there even sort of a cursory zoning audit of the city, or is that not quite? I mean, maybe that's a differential scope, but just
Right.
curious on that.
I mean, so in terms of like a zoning audit, I'm not sure, but we are definitely, okay, there we go. That's the question.
No,
There's
that's
the answer to that. But about the missing middle study, yes, that is absolutely, we are well aware of it. Kendra is a member of our core team. And I have, and Sasha and Kendra have already had several conversations about where we can see those two working, because they are inextricably linked, right? So,
And I would just say, it's not to say that zoning won't be mentioned or in the plan, for
Right.
sure. I'm really interested in our big corridors and how, so it's just, like, we don't want to duplicate work, right? So
Certainly, yeah.
The missing middle's done a great job of a lot of, we're not going to duplicate work. We don't have enough money for that in this contract.
That makes sense. Thank you.
thank you.
Kind of along that same line of not duplicating work, but being aware of what's going on, and the same question around sort of the work that the reparations committee is
Yes.
doing and the reparation, that housing team that's part of that. I mean, is there a plan to build that in a systematic way, or is that coming through the resident roundtable, or is there a separate track for those the ideas that are
Yeah.
surfacing in that process to come into the housing plan?
I mean, I think that speaking to, and forgive me, I don't remember the name of the person specifically, but I know that there's a housing element of the Reparations Commission, and whoever is managing that particular subcommittee is certainly someone that we want to speak with, ASAP.
We're also going to try to see if there's time on their agenda next Tuesday night.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
That we're going to actually, Jared won't be here in person, but we could bring him in virtually and do a meeting, part of the housing IFA meeting, and get their input and kind of create those connections. And I think they'll be connected through the resident engagement roundtable, probably.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure, but.
I just,
But I
wanna
appreciate, sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I want to see this be successful, and I know if it doesn't integrate all of the other, streams that are
Yeah.
flowing in our community that, that people are already invested in, that we get to the end of this process and sort of go, oh, but what about? And,
Right. No, this is exactly what, AHAC can help us with, making those connections for us. One thing that I've learned since I've started this project is that so much foundational work has already been done for us, like the stakeholder mapping that was done by Thrive, the building work group, study that I wasn't aware of, the missing middle study, the reparations commission. I mean, there's a lot of foundational work here that we can build off of, and it's actually really amazing to see how large the affordable housing ecosystem is here. There's other communities that I work with, and they can't name a single housing provider in the whole city. And meanwhile, the other day, we had over 110 different stakeholders and organizations that we were discussing. And so I think a big part of this project is certainly coming up with new and creative solutions for affordable housing in Asheville, but it's also figuring out how to bring all those resources under one tent so that, to your point, like things don't get missed, that priorities and goals and resources are aligned. And so that's definitely going to be a big undertaking of this project is figuring out how to bring all of those pieces together.
Great. Any other questions for Jeremy? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all.
And we can open up for public comment if there are people here who want to speak to the topics that have been discussed already around the affordable housing plan. Obviously, the rest of our agenda, if you're here to speak about housing trust fund policy or some of those other things, hold that for a later comment period. But if you're interested in speaking regarding the affordable housing plan, we'll open the session for that.
Are you allowed to speak twice on the agenda? Okay.
Yeah, come on.
We're hearing you guys talk this morning. Good morning. My name is Whitley English. I'm a native of Asheville. I'm a community health worker in violence prevention. I've been a housing recipient all my life, but I work for the Peace Team through the Spark Foundation. And Peace Team stands for Providing Education and Advocacy Through Community Engagement. So I think what we do in our team could help with what you guys were been talking about, because we consider ourselves, and we are trusted members in the community if we already have those relationships. But building those relationships with others and seeing what they need firsthand, that could be a bridging the gap. Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
great.
great, thank you. That sounds like a great resource for the Resident Engagement Roundtable. Any other public comment on the affordable housing plan? All right, well, thank you. We can move into our next item, which is our work plan task around providing recommendations to HCD regarding the Housing Trust Fund. I want to start by thanking the folks on the committee who were involved in our different work group processes, build and connect. Those processes fed into the recommendations that we're making today, and then the team that came together to draft this set of recommendations. So we shared those recommendations out to the full committee earlier this week. I hope that folks had a chance to dig into them. I'm not going to go through the whole thing line by line, but I thought I'd hit a few things that are significant as we look at this. There were a few things that we wanted to make sure that we captured coming out of the input processes that we had and the discussions that we've had as a team in drafting this set of recommendations. So some of them are fairly minute and just formatting things with the document. But the big things I would think are as follows. One is to really realign the priorities that we use to assess applications to this program to the goals that were articulated by community members. So you'll see that in section 1. You'll see that de-emphasizing some of the things about the sort of cost reasonableness of a project and developer capacity, and a new emphasis on the number of affordable units and the depth of affordability. The other thing that you'll see in this document, going back to the build team's work, and the comment that Brian made earlier about the limitations around MSD and development, is a move to remove a prohibition that was in the existing document around the use of Housing Trust Fund dollars to support off-site infrastructure development. So making it possible, if we're relying on developers to be the ones who extend our water and sewer lines in our community, we ought to make we got to include those costs in what could be financed through affordable housing or through affordable trust fund, through the Housing Trust Fund. Sorry. And And then the final piece, and this shows up in several places in the document, was a reflection of the ongoing conversation that we've been having around voucher utilization and how we can leverage federal dollars into our local affordable housing work. And you'll see that in several places in this document, one of them in a new definition of affordability. So previously, to be considered an affordable development under this project, it needed either to be sold at a price point that was affordable or leased at or below an affordable rent to an 80 or 60% AMI buyer. We've added the definition for that allows units to qualify as affordable at fair market rent or voucher program standards if those units are leased to voucher holders. So that's a new piece. Similarly, we see some more voucher language in the special terms section of the document and also in the fair housing section of the document. So 3 different places where we've tried to build in that sort of groundswell that we've had on this community and what we've heard from the local residents around voucher acceptance. So those are some of the high points about what's in these recommendations. Again, you've had a chance to go through those, and we can take them point by point, or you can bring up questions. Also, Sasha's put the existing policy document on the screen if you want to reference the recommended changes back to what the current policy is. So with that, I'll open the floor for any thoughts or comments.
And I did print out a few copies of your changes.
Yeah.
In case some people just can't deal with screens all the time.
Does anybody
Anybody wants one, just
need a hard copy?
I'll just say, I mean, my comments probably go back to what I said to the consultant, and I was kind of charged from reading. I did, read through the Housing Trust Fund, read through the recommendations before the meeting, and that while they feel like they want to accomplish the purpose and they're so idealistic, they're not grounded in reality. And that's really what I'm so concerned about. Is like we want to change it and they need to change. But we already have a program that, like, the last time it worked, the last round, we didn't even have enough applications for the whole funding amount, and that there was only 3 applications, and I don't think any of them, maybe 2 of them, maybe one of them met true Housing Trust Fund standards, but the others were, like, the one, mine was so off the chart, and the one that the Housing Authority did ask for a grant, that it feels like trying to, it's almost like when I was preparing, so here I've got a Housing Trust Fund, I've applied for one. When I was in the middle of it, I was just like, am I even doing this? The only reason I'm doing this is because I'm on the committee and I want to see what this is like so I can understand this better. There's so many times in the middle of doing that application that I'm like, why would I even want this? Why as a developer would I want this as an incentive? Because all it is a loan. And I think the reality of that, I think there's this bigger question about the Housing Trust Fund is just being a loan, that how effective is it? Because really all it is, it's like, well, okay, instead of it being a market rate interest loan, like it'll be a 1% or something. That I just don't know if there's enough oomph in what the Housing Trust Fund does as a loan for it to be worth it, and then to restrict it more seems problematic. And then especially not have it almost seems like some of the input that you really needed in this is people who would be applying for it or have applied for it. Because reading through it, I'm just like, the last time, it's like if we design all these policies and then you go to council and council can override anything anyway, why don't we just create something? Why don't we just say, like, affordable housing has the flexibility for whoever to write their own proposal, and these are the tools I need to make it work, because I'm just worried. Like, that's really what it is. I'm worried about, like, having gone through the last round and what it was like, and seeing, like, oh, we're going to tighten this up for this, which is beautiful to do for what we want, for idealism. But if it's not grounded in the reality of who's applying, I don't know how much good it is.
Yeah. I don't know, I'd be interested in hearing specifics on that, because I feel like the team worked really hard to, I mean, so we expanded the definition of affordability, we expanded the eligible uses around preservation, we expanded the ability to use the funds for infrastructure. I mean, there were several, I mean.
We raised the caps.
We
raised
removed the market study requirement.
Yeah, I mean, there were several things that we intentionally did to try to make this easier and to expand the, you know, what was eligible under this. I mean, I don't feel like I mean, when you go back and look at our work plan task around this, it was to, you know, review the housing trust funds scoring criteria and, you know, make a limited number of changes. I think we may have already exceeded our scope just a little bit by what we're recommending, but, you know,
If I had to recommend anything, I would say that it should be open to be park grant. I think if that's anything, that's probably what I would say, is that the having all of the incentive of the whole housing trust is just a loan may not be enough. And maybe that's really the biggest thing, is like, that there shouldn't be, and I don't, you know, that would be the biggest thing, because of all the things I ran into it as when applying, and it just felt like, why would someone even do this?
yeah.
And so I think that's really the biggest thing.
Yeah,
is like,
no, and I think grants can be a part of this. I think we would want to use them selectively, because the whole purpose of the program was so that the coffers get, refilled,
Sure.
As we go throughout time. I think where we do need to use grants are when we get to these projects that are 100% affordable.
Sure.
It's very, very difficult to do what Homeward Bound did or Haywood Street did without grants, because, like you say, you're trying to serve a population at under 60% AMI, and yet try to make a project work with a loan, even at the 2% that's in here, that ain't easy. So I agree with you that we do need to consider grants for certain projects, but it is the ones that really deliver the big bang for the community in the long term. Because we don't need to get the money back on these projects that are 100% affordable, because they're going to be there in perpetuity.
Right.
So then I think you can get, if there is no limit to your affordability period, then I think it's perfectly safe to say it can be a grant.
Yeah.
If there's a 20-year limit on it, I need the money back so I can buy another unit 20 years from now.
And that's I'd say the biggest piece that's missing is like, okay, like, if this would be the scorecard, if you can go over this amount, then it's an option for a grant. Because that seems to be the piece that's like, we're changing something that, well, still it's just a loan. A loan's a loan, a loan. It's not, and if there was more of a path than having to go through this and then go in front of council and then say, well, can you make this a grant instead, like the Housing Authority did, it would have been, if there was a path to say, well, if I did this, then I have the option for 20% of this, 50% to be a grant. I think that would be the biggest bite that we can make for a recommendation about the housing trust fund.
It just, yeah. I'm biting my tongue. I just want to say, we got 6 applications last year. 5 we took forward to council. None of them that we took forward did not fit the housing trust fund. I thought they were all fine, as I remember. The grant thing is the thing that didn't fit. And, Habitat had a similar project to yours, Barry, where they turn construction money into down payment assistance. I think they do that with the county as well. So we know that's a model that works. I think we have to, and I want to use Andy's words, but I'm not going to do it well, but like that whole return on investment and what Brian was just speaking to, like if we just start granting out money more and more, then we really have no money to give to anybody else. We'll go through our resources much faster. And I think I talk to a lot of developers who are really excited that we have this loan fund that will give them 2%. I mean, that's huge for developers. And just for y'all's historic kind of look, when we look back at the history of the Housing Trust Fund, we've done tons of projects with small developers and small numbers of units. The whole first decade of this program was almost primarily small projects. So I just want, and there's nothing in this policy that prevents that from happening. I think with costs going up, it's gotten a lot harder, probably.
But I would be supportive of amending our recommendations to Barry's suggestion around projects that are permanently affordable being able to apply for grants. and encouraging to the guy, because I think that will open it up to more developers to make projects work, knowing it can be grants rather than loans.
That's for you all to discuss. I'm not going to comment on that.
So just to clarify, the discussion I'm hearing is to essentially set up I guess, a grant track or a, set of criteria that would enable or make you eligible to get a grant versus, all of this is on the premise of it's a revolving loan fund, which, that is the nature of a trust fund. So, I think that makes sense, at least conceptually. I'd be curious to see, I guess, more so what the criteria would be for a out-and-out grant versus this revolving loan.
Yeah, I think that the fund needs to be revolving when the affordability period is limited. Because we know in 20 years, we need to get the money back we loaned you on your project in order to buy the next units. So that was the theory behind the revolving loan program, replenishment. But I don't think that's required when you get permanent affordability, because it's there forever. I don't need to buy those units back. I don't need to recreate them. They're there in the community forever.
And then how does the housing trust fund, besides the payback, is it funded?
It's out of the general fund, I believe.
Just in the general budget every year?
Right now, council allocates $500,000 every year through the general fund. And then we put a bunch of bond money in there last
Right.
year. I will say that we have a lot of loans on the books that have such flexible payment terms, we're not getting paid back. They're almost a grant. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes, I do know.
So- So,
So I did one of those.
and we also want to make sure and I know we have another meeting in November to talk about this, but what we talked about is like a certain number of changes now and like big changes later. Like,
So I think the difference is, having done a project that was permanently affordable, what we then did was an interest was basically a no payment loan for a long period of time.
Right.
And then interest only in order to get out far enough to make the economics work.
Right.
The problem with that is that we had to keep coming back to propose things that were not within the bounds of this document. And so there are a lot of people that were on the board of the organization I was with who were like, why are we wasting our time? We shouldn't do this because it'll never go through.
mm-hmm.
And so it does, if you don't hang the carrot in the document to try, then people won't, or may not, and therefore projects won't get done.
Can you pull up the special terms section of the existing policy?
I should say, like, if you had a goal just in it, like, hey, if a project is willing to do more than 20%, more than 30% of units at 60% AMI, then there's an option to look at it as a loan. It's like, pick what that's what I would just recommend. The one carrot to put in there is like, okay, well, if you're willing to adjust your project to do this percent of 60% of below AMI, this could be a grant.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's what the current policy tries to do with the special terms, but it doesn't, which is where it sounds like the piece that you guys were able to tuck under in terms of a very long-term, interest-only,
Right.
deferred payment kind of. So this could be a place, if we wanted to consider creating a, special terms carve out for grant funding if certain qualifications were met, just like we have certain qualifications here that will allow you to negotiate a lower interest loan payment or a longer term or whatever it might be.
Even if you just took the third bullet point here about payments and then added something that grants would be considered for projects that meet multiple of the criteria and goals within the policy. Just saying that's a possibility just lets people know, be creative, propose something if you've got a project to make it work.
It's almost how the language in that one is already there about there being a waiver for payment during the loan period being considered. for extremely low households being served. So, I mean, it's kind of that same type of language that could reference a consideration of a grant.
Is it as, I mean, is that as simple as, I mean, from a, I mean, it's something that, I was on, the part of the small group that was looking at these, and is it something as simple as having a heading that says grant option, these following criteria? I'm just asking.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
if
think
you're-
we could add it to our set of recommendations if we, if the committee feels like a grant option under Housing Trust Fund is an important recommendation to make to HCD. Again, that doesn't mean that it's gonna get all the way into the final document.
Sure.
But if we feel like that's an important tool to add to this, then it's broader in scope than we had originally set out to do with this set of revisions. But if we feel like it's important, then we should make the recommendation.
I know this is not what Barry's saying, but I think it's the opposite kind of, but I think if we were considering grants, I think we need like objective criteria. Permanent affordability makes sense to me. That's like about the only thing that makes sense to me. Frankly, I'm just, and low income. We don't have enough money to fund all the people that are going to come out of the woodwork for a grant. If we kind of just blow it open.
But it'd be great to
So
see
I kind
this
of like
proposal.
Scott's idea, then, did you say, under limited circumstances, we will consider grants?
I mean, that's
Affordability?
that's part of the I have to read through these three bullets in more detail again, but I mean, in essence, that's what part of this is already laying out, in addition to, I guess, being more explicit on X criteria, permanent affordability, whatnot.
I think the tendency is to want to give someone a track, and, step-by-step directions on how to get a grant or, any of these. But, what Barry said about like leaving things open, and like, we're not going to think of everything. It's the developers, boots on the ground that are going to bring the proposals to us. And I don't want to create so many rules that we're limiting that sort of creativity. So how do you strike a balance? Which I think the scorecard is great. It tells exactly what the priorities are, and we can make decisions based on that.
Yeah, I don't know if you pick your score, if you just say, hey, a score's over this, might be eligible to apply for a grant, or I don't know how specific, it could just be that you leave the flexibility. If scores are over X point, then they're eligible to ask for part of it as a grant. And I don't know if you need, I know policy likes to be very specific, but I think it might be better to leave it, the proposal a little bit, so the proposal can be worded a little more open-ended. Like when I did watching the Housing Authority present about asking at the council, it feels like such an unfair to have to be all the way, to have to done all the work to get with all those applications through city staff, through recommendation, then to go to council and have to go against staff's recommendation of they asked for a grant, staff had to recommend no because it wasn't in the policy, and then council had to override it. That if we had the flexibility in the policy to say, well, it could be a grant if it's over this score. I think that then it might encourage better applications on the Housing Trust Fund, because then it's like, well, if I do this, then I could do that. And I think, it falls in line with what we were having some conversations about Luigi, that Luigi's great, but it doesn't work for the most affordable projects anyway, because most of them are owned by nonprofits. They already have no taxes. Right. So it's like the Luigi grant doesn't work for those who are providing the housing in the most needed way. So if we can give the Housing Trust Fund a little bite by giving the option, then it gives staff the option for when they prepare the report to actually recommend it, rather than have the applicant have to go against the staff report with council. So, and I don't know what if that wording needs to be done now, or if we can just say, hey, we're making a AHAC makes a recommendation that standards be worked up that where Housing Trust Fund can be used as a grant. Is that? I don't know when this moves on.
Yeah, my one hesitation on this, and in light of the conversation with the affordable housing plan, is that again, and it's you know, if we have limited resources, we create some sort of threshold for a grant program, and then, you know, the plan identifies, you know, through a much more robust community process than we did here, a very different set of priorities that we want to use to invest our funds. We're in a position to have to claw that back, you know, to redirect those resources toward something that we come up with in the plan, versus holding with this now and bringing that in after, you know, bringing a grant option in after, you know, once we've seen sort of what's going to come out through the plan. Again, I mean, I like the direction. I think the idea about, you know, it's important to signal flexibility in the policy. Otherwise, the only people who know about the you know, who are willing to take, you know, the only people who assume that there is flexibility are people who have pre-existing experience and connections with, you know, with the process enough, like the housing authority, to say, you know what, we're gonna ask for this because we probably can get it, right? Your average, you know, your average developer might not. I want to, what I'd like to do, just in the interest of making sure that we have time to discuss all of these things, if we can, we have time next, you know, to bring this back for a vote next month, and still have, let me rephrase that in the form of a question, Alex. Do we have time to bring this back to AHAC next month and still have it teed up for the time that you need for the December request for proposal date for Housing Trust Fund? Or do we need to?
Yes,
move
I mean,
these
yes, I mean, yeah,
recommendations
I mean,
this month?
HCD in October is kind of set. I mean, yeah,
So it's not getting on the HCD, the October agenda, no
No.
matter what we do today?
And, I mean, I haven't really even had a chance to analyze all these
Yeah.
ideas. We are currently looking for, not we, but the city, not me, but looking for a different date for the November HCD because of the Thanksgiving holiday, so it may be the last week of November. We don't have it yet, but that meeting will definitely happen
Okay,
because we've got other items that have to go, so.
okay. I just don't want to, you know, I don't want to tee this all up and then have it miss a year anyway, because you have a date for your RFP to go out.
Right, so I'm thinking,
Because at that
I'm
point, we
doing
should
it
just
to
wait on all
myself. I
of this
swore I
until
wasn't
after
going
the
to do
plan is
this
done.
again this year, but we're going to do it again. So we'll be at council, the idea is to be at council on December 12th, and I will have help before then, so, and then ideally releasing the RFP, or, you know, NOFA, whatever, December 15th, probably, that Friday. And then, so that's opening for applications, and so we'll be doing some things we didn't do last year.
Okay.
Doing a little bit more promotion and maybe doing an information session after that opens, well before the deadline. We are coordinating with the county. The county has shortened their application window a little bit this year by a couple weeks. So, or it's not set yet, but they probably will. So, but we're still very much aligning with them so that we can have our elected officials kind of together in their decision-making process.
Okay, so as long as we're synced up, we can pull this back and consider some what a grant path might look like in this, and bring it back, and we'll include it in our discussion for next month. Are there any other thoughts, questions, concerns with the recommendations that when we approve them will be coming from all of us?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Since nobody's speaking up. For the scoring table, did you all look at different projects, like how they would score under this new rubric?
I did not. You know, if you have some sample projects, we could, you know, things that you got last year, we could look at them. I mean, one of the things that I think when we look at the scoring criteria, you know, there were a couple of questions that the committee who was working on this had, which was, you know, one, does it make sense to have are we relying on this scoring criteria enough that we should have a separate pathway for ownership projects and rental projects?
Right.
And, you know, we just didn't get to any clarity on that. But obviously there are points that are available to one type of project that aren't available to the other type of project in the scoring criteria. The other question and recommendation that's coming from the committee is that, is it worth establishing a minimum scoring, a minimum eligible score, and if so, what? And here we're recommending a minimum eligible score of 75 points. To Barry's, point, is that making it harder for a potential developer to thread the needle? I looked at this and ran a few things through, in my head, and there's several different pathways to 75 points. That would give a developer a pathway to success. I didn't stress test this against any actual proposals that you've gotten, but we certainly could. Again, this was more about our team trying to capture the priorities in the scoring document that came from the conversations that we had with community members.
Sasha, could you bring up the scoring document on the screen just so people could see it? So they can kind of follow along with the bouncing ball?
Yeah.
I handed out a few copies, yes.
Thank you.
Do you mean the existing
new one?
scoring
Yeah, I was just
criteria
gonna
versus
ask
the
that.
new?
The new one.
Thank you, we're doing this.
Sorry,
Yeah.
no, the new one.
Yeah. Yeah. And it might have helped to have had a side-by-side comparison of those two different things. I spent a lot of time with them side-by-side on my desk over the last month. But.
I don't think this. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So one of the things that when we looked at this last December, we had a little bit of a question around, number of units versus depth of affordability. And so you'll see in question number 1 there that the point system tries to account for, both of those things, number of units, number of affordable units in a project, and the depth of affordability of those units, and kind of merges that into one thing so that you could wind up with a project that had, some 60% AMI units and some 80% AMI units and whatever it might be. That's a new piece here that tried to reconcile that question that we had when we looked at this in December. Other than that, you see a lot more points around rental assistance utilization.
I think the one thing that still might need to be amended on here is the long-term affordability point. I think the 25-point maximum that's on there probably needs to be raised to account for projects that are going permanently.
Yeah.
So that to me, if you made that unlimited as well, what that says is someone who is doing something that's 80 units of all affordable housing permanently ends up with 160 points.
Right.
And that says we should do it,
Yeah.
which is what I think our policy should be geared toward. It shouldn't be a question mark around when we have projects like that come through. Where the questions come through, I think, is when, something is 10 units and it's 15 years of affordability. That's where we really need to make the value judgment. Is this something we really want to take the time and energy to go through? Which is where the minimum comes in.
The way the number, there's a couple, well, it doesn't, this, I'm just trying to in my head apply a ownership model, and the scorecard doesn't necessarily work for that.
I know, I think that's why we do need to split the scorecards.
Yeah.
Is
Because
it
I'm
really-
looking at that, maybe if instead of just tenant-based rental, it said or homeownership vouchers.
Yeah. I think just having a separate criteria,
Yeah.
they're just apples and oranges.
Yeah.
And so in your ownership one, you could have is down payment assistance available and, other creative loan programs and have other criteria that would make more sense than kind of muddying this all up.
Yeah, and then the number of affordable units by just a number, there's percentage bit to that, and I get that, but it definitely disfavor, like, it makes it hard for smaller size projects to even, like in my head, like I just tallied up, I don't think like my 10 affordable home ownerships would even meet your 50.
I agree with that. So for home ownership, you should be able to do like single units and have them go through and score okay.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
In my mind.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to build, you know, we just really, for the minimum, it's gotta be for rental projects, I think, just so that you get ourselves focused on the projects that are having the most impact.
And I'm gonna share one more thing, and I'll shut up about the grant bit, is the way, you know, having chaired the committee, like the way, like if you make a recommendation now rather than wait, if it's just a recommendation, like AHAC supports the idea of part of housing is lending a grant and we pass it, then it starts to float and it gets more attention, and it'll get attention from council and HCD staff, so it'll get floated as a discussion rather than wait until next month when then the time restraint from like when the time it passes until when we need to hurry up and get the Housing Trust Fund RFP out. So I would just like, if the committee is in line, like it should be considered, I would just recommend the motion because it gets us taken seriously. It's the only thing that, as you know, the action item on our minutes, that'll be the action that then floats to the top. So just want to put that out there, sorry.
Other thoughts on the scoring, on,
So and just to refresh my memory, and I mean, these criteria are stemming from I think it was the June community survey that was done, correct? So one new element that was on there, I believe it's a new element, is resident community input and project planning. And actually the way that the five versus 10 point split is done there, I think is actually pretty reasonable in terms of any potential opposition to a project. I believe in the original iteration of this, it was sort of an all or nothing proposition of you get 10 points for getting a letter of support. And I think this is an important distinction of at least saying you've met with the community. You're halfway there. That's 5 points. If you're getting out and out support, that's a doubling of the points. But I think it's a smart way to split that out, at least in the sense of, for better or for worse, oftentimes, affordable housing projects are sometimes opposed by, I mean, if you're polling a surrounding community, it may be opposed, but at least through this points mechanism, if you're meeting with them, you're getting halfway on this point system. So it's just my quick comment of, I actually like that differentiation of, hey, you met with them, you got halfway there with 5 points. If you get a thumbs up, that's 10 points. So.
Can I say about the meeting with the community and giving them the honest blueprint? Because from the legacy meeting that I attended last week, the legacy neighborhood meeting I attended last week, some of the members were stating that Project Aspire, they came out to the community, they gave them one version of the project, but when they went to the city council, another version of the project was actually spoken of at the council. So, just to the developers, be honest. Be honest with the communities that are being impacted with these projects. Don't try to backhand bring in something else.
yeah, that's a great point. I want to turn our attention, if there's no other thoughts on the scorecard or what we've talked about thus far, we spent several months here talking about voucher utilization and how do we expand voucher utilization in projects that we invest in with local funds. Like, do you feel like the language that we're proposing here accomplishes the goals that we had discussed? Do we, so again, there's three different places in the document that refer to that. One is in the special terms section, one is in a third definition for affordability, and then finally in the new, or the revised fair housing section of the document. And David, I'm going to lean on you a little bit on that fair housing question to make sure that, you know, the sort of the language in there around source of income discrimination is.
I mean, yeah, it says guidelines, and I don't think it's not a law. So, but I think I was really impressed with the changes to the document. I think this discussion is really fruitful. It's good to hear perspectives about how we want to open this up more. And, you know, I could give specific feedback. I mean, I did think about reducing the minimum score just to get more ideas, but I don't know how complicated the process is or how many applications the city gets. But in light of the fact that, you know, there is grant language in here, and you guys have spent a lot of time doing it, and I think you've incorporated a lot of our discussion over the last few months. You know, I would leave it up to the drafting group who worked to do this, but it seems like we're going to be evaluating our tools. This is going to be one of them, and this discussion we're having about how to make this loan fund work better, maybe have a separate grant fund, because I'd be hesitant to support turning this into a grant program today. Like, I'd really want to think about how that is going to diminish the actual fund out there. You know, I think we need to look closer at those questions and talk to more people about it. But I do think it does a good job making sure that, you know, vouchers, there's several places in here where I think that's referred to, and I think that's something that's really important. I'd be happy to move this forward today as with these changes, just because I do think we'll be looking at this again next year. So I think it's important because obviously there's a whole cycle that this will determine, or with our recommendations at least will go forward. But
Okay. Any other thoughts on did we capture the voucher language?
I think so, yeah. Would you the other thing as I'm reading through, like in the tenant base, like the more than 80% is 25, should there be a bigger spread between 50 to, because like if someone's doing a project that's 50%, they would get the 20 points for it. If they did over 80%, it's 25. Should that spread be bigger? Like it's almost, I don't know, that's the only number thing I looked at.
I mean,
Yeah,
one
and-
idea might be to like, sorry to
ahead.
just interject, but
Nope.
maybe one idea is like that you're happy with, you could make a motion about the text things and then just next month spend time on the scoring. Because I don't feel like we've really, or I don't know, I haven't had a chance to look at it at all.
Yeah, and really the scoring is more of an appendix to the text of the recommendations. And I don't know that it is really even our role to dig into the numerical scoring. I don't know that we have the, expertise other than to say, we are recommending that it follow the priorities that were set from, what's in point one on the recommendations document. We recommend that they revise the Housing Trust Fund priorities to align with community input. But we can spend more time on that before our November meeting, or I heard David almost make a motion that we move to approve. Let me see if I can sum up the conversation here so that we can get on to some comment on this and stay on schedule. I'm hearing kind of two different directions, possibly to kind of call the question today and vote on the document as is. Second would be to a motion to have the drafting work group go back and consider a distinct ownership and rental track in the scoring and the possibility of a grant track in the document. So if that's, those seem like the two options that I'm hearing on the floor right now. I don't know if anybody wants to move either one.
So this, if the motion is moved on it, where does this go next? Like, does this go, is the motion then to go back to the drafting?
So let's say motion number one, should someone want to make it, would be for the work group that drafted this document, possibly with other input, take these 2 points back up and bring the document back in. So the 2 points being a separate ownership and rental track in the scoring model, and a provision around the grant as a grant as an eligible use of funds and under what conditions, and bring the recommendations back for a vote next month. The other option is, advance the document as is and tackle those other 2 questions in a subsequent revision.
I would make that first motion. Because the things I see in it, like most of the scoring card looks good to me. I do think the breaking up of the owner, like that really seems like that it needs some work to separate it for ownership and rental. So rather than have 2 separate motions of we approve this as it is, I would say that I would make a motion for the drafting committee to bring this back next month with a revised scoring card for homeownership opportunities, and to explore scoring, possible scoring criteria for housing trust fund to be used as a grant.
All right, there's a motion on the floor. Any discussion?
I'll second it.
You'll second it? All right, thank you. I was just going to say, I did
Do you
this
want
out
to do
of...
public comment? Were you planning on doing public?
Oh, I was going to do it after. Do we need to,
You don't have to, because this isn't a public hearing,
do we do it before the action is taken or after the action is taken?
There's no point doing it, well, I shouldn't say that. Oftentimes, people will do, or boards will do a motion in a second and then hear comment
All
before
right.
they vote.
Then let's do that. Thank you for the parliamentary advice. It's been so long since we've had any public comment in the room. I don't think I've actually done that in any of the time that I've been co-chair. So where we've actually had real human beings to talk to. So we'll open the floor to public comment.
Hello, my name is Alexandra Aaron, and I am with Disability Partners. Ms. Smith's point hit hard. I'm wondering if there could be languaging around where the letter of support that is connected to the actual plan is somehow guaranteed, like that there's languaging in there that when the plan is scored, that is the same plan that ends up before the council. Does that make sense? Like some kind of a proof or I don't know. But I think that that's an important point, that integrity and no sleight of hand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other folks who'd like to make comment?
Hi. Can everybody hear me? I have to put this down at my height. My name's Cassidy Moore. I'm Government Relations and Grants Manager for Asheville Habitat, also a resident of the city of Asheville. I'm really excited to see these proposed changes. I'm a grant writer, so I do have this perspective of what it looks like to put together a proposal like this. So thank you for your time in looking at this. I wish to express my support for policies that prevent source of income discrimination in government-funded or subsidized projects. As you know, in Buncombe County, 1 out of every 3 issued housing vouchers go unused each year. Source of income discrimination plays a large role in compounding our affordable housing crisis, leaving many families perpetually stuck in substandard housing or temporary housing, or even worse, homeless. I'm grateful for the important work of organizations like Thrive and the Buncombe Rental Assistance Collaborative to help address this critically high rate of unused housing vouchers. These federal resources should be fully utilized to address our local affordable housing crisis, and improved policies such as this will help us get closer to the goal of ensuring every single available housing voucher is put to use in our community. So I think, as Enterprise was saying, this is a great opportunity for the city to be bold and set an example. So thank you. And if that's okay, I'd like to pass out a little bit of information here.
Please do. Other public comment?
Whitley English, resident of Asheville. I'm a public housing recipient all my life. I'm here today to voice my support for policies that combat income discrimination and enhance the acceptance of rental assistance in government-funded or incentivized projects. As a dedicated community advocate for affordable housing and a recipient of housing vouchers for over a decade, I fully grasp the critical importance of ensuring that all community members can access these essential resources. Moreover, I'm acutely aware of the significant limitations that often hinder housing options. The importance of affordable, equitable, and safe housing cannot be emphasized enough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Jen?
Hi, y'all. I'm Jen Hampton, Housing and Wages Organizer for Just Economics. I had not intended to speak today, so I don't have anything prepared, but I do want to just say I fully support what both Cassidy and Whitley said about vouchers acceptance being a part of this, because it's hard. I just moved out of public housing myself, so I also wanted to, speak on living conditions. I don't know if that can be, addressed with all of this too, but I really feel like the source of income discrimination is huge for our community and would really be helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other public comment? Any other discussion from the committee on the motion on the floor, which is to task the drafting work group to consider a revision to the proposed scorecard that would create an ownership and rental track and consider a threshold at which point Housing Trust Fund dollars may be eligible to be used as a grant fund. Any other discussion on that motion?
The drafting committee is willing to do that, sounds like. Okay.
We've been drafted to do so.
Right. Being voluntold.
I think since they constitute a quorum of who's here when we vote, they know what they're getting into. All right, if there's no further discussion, all in favor of the motion as presented, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you. All right, what's next? Updates and reports. We are 5 minutes behind, so not so bad considering what we've gone through. Sasha, what's up with
I just said,
CED
because I don't, I guess to me, the major update was the plan discussion we had today. I can't think of any big updates in community and economic development. We're getting close to being fully staffed. We're in the process of making offers to, all of us have been interviewing people not frantically, but interviewing people and getting close to having offers and having people on board. So I think by the end of the year, we should hopefully be fully staffed. There is a, homeless strategy division is doing a series of
Outreach.
kind of education on homelessness issues. They had their first session this Tuesday, and there's really the next two, it says the Tuesday's a prerequisite, but you all, they're not gonna kick you out, I'm sure. So I could send that around. I think they're usually at Pack Library midday. There's several things coming up. There's the housing conference, and I'm kind of jumping a little bit, housing conference in Raleigh in a few weeks. I'm on a panel about affordable housing and land use with some other folks from Durham County, Chatham County, and New Hanover County. There's also a Building Small event. I think I sent it around to you that ULI is presenting. It does cost money, and that's on the 16th, Monday. So it's about kind of building smaller structures and affordability. I can send that around again, but it's not free. So those are my thoughts today.
Okay. Any project updates on any of the funded projects?
Sure. So a couple of our projects that were funded by the Housing Trust Fund are trying to get to closing by spring. And financing and construction costs are definitely a barrier, but they're working towards those deadlines.
closing on their housing trust fund loan.
Yes, and all the,
Okay.
you know, usually you close on that at the same time as you close on
Yep.
usually your other financing. I was going to say something else. We did receive a Luigi application for 115 Fairview, which is a conditional zoning project that's headed to council. It was the kind of, timing's a little off. So it's already been to Planning and Zoning Commission, so they're delaying their city council vote to get those on the same track. So they would be at city council on December 12th. We were planning on taking it to HCD in October, but I think we're going to delay it to November. It's a fairly large project, and it's a complicated application, so.
And update on when council will be voting on new membership for AHAC?
This month, so at your next meeting, thank you for bringing that up. Your next meeting, you should have 4 new members. So Margie and Emily are, you know, Emily may be watching actually, but you know, she's she was filling a partial term. I think that ends this month. She's not returning. She's moved out of town. So, in Margie's position, and then Barry and Dewana's. So.
Great. Scott, anything new on the missing middle study?
Not quite yet. I know some part of the advisory working group, and we had received a highly draft, I'll call it sort of skeleton report in mid-August. We were anticipating meeting, I believe, in September, and the advisory group received an email from Opticos, which is the prime consultant on it, just noting that the displacement study being done by Cascadia Partners, I think there was a bit more work to be done on that. So I believe we should be getting an update sometime in the next month or so. I don't know if you have any more information from Vidilla or Candor in terms of schedule, but in essence, it was, just more time needed, both coordinating with staff and I believe the substance of the reports.
Yeah, staff is doing another round of comments, so we're kind of, so we have a little bit of time, not a ton, but, so then our comments are due to them, and then they will return like a draft, I think, to go to your committee, probably early November.
Okay.
But I think the hope is to get done in December.
That's been my understanding, so.
Yeah. Is there an opportunity to get folks from Opticos or even our own staff to present this, particularly once the displacement study is done? I feel like it's really important for us to consider this through an affordable housing lens. I think there's I said this last month, this is my new soapbox to get on, but I feel like there's a sort of the assumption that, increasing density, by its very nature increases affordability, and I don't know that I think we need to, make sure that we're putting the right affordability structures in place before we start thinking about some of these changes in zoning policy, so that we don't wind up creating displacement through, incentivizing the kind of development that we want to have, but having unintended consequences around affordability. So I'd love to get those folks in front of us, and maybe this is a topic for some of our time on our December retreat, that we really kind of dig into that, density/affordability question.
Yes, we can discuss it. I mean, I can't promise on behalf of like Vidilla and Candra, but I think they would be happy to come.
Okay.
It's just a matter of timing it with, there'll be some time between the report being finished and before any implementation activities begin. Just
Certainly.
staff's going to need time to kind of really digest it and figure out where's the priority, and then really start and still do more community engagement, comment about where do we start with all of this. So.
Yeah, well, we should start with thinking about it from an affordability lens as far as I'm concerned. So, all right, thanks. Any other updates? All right, we'll move on into any informal discussion or future agenda items. Obviously getting that missing middle thing on our calendar for as a future agenda item. We got several agenda items coming out of the plan presentation we had earlier today in terms of when we're going to have updates and when they're going to need us to take action on things. So anything else that we'd like to add for discussion?
I would just like to share. So I'm, the flag lot and cottage UDO change to go to council October 24th. I would, appreciate anyone's support, but also what I would ask is that once it passes, that we look at some kind of streamlined affordable rebate program to go along with that. So basically, if we're going to open up available lots with incentive for middle income housing, that how we can ride along and create a program that would have a rebate program to encourage affordable housing on it. And whether it's housing trust fund loans or something else, but I think like if land use opens up, we have the opportunity to create a new program to really encourage not developers, but individual homeowners and landowners, how they can be part of the solution. So I would just ask for that to be considered in the future.
Yeah. Barry, if you have thoughts as you're looking at as we're making one more swipe at the revisions on Housing Trust Fund to, think about if there's anything in there that's would prevent affordable development on, via these two ordinance changes, I think that's probably the way for us to kind of make something in, is to make sure that we're not keeping out something that, previously wasn't allowable that now is allowable. Let's just anticipate, let's future-proof this policy to the extent that we can with things that we know are likely to happen. Any other discussion? Sasha mentioned the Affordable Housing Conference coming up at the end of the month already. We've got a retreat on our agenda for December 7th.
Yeah, I did want to just let the committee know, Matthew Desmond is coming to UNCA for Pisgah's Justice Forum. Matthew Desmond is a housing policy nerd. He wrote the book Evicted, which came out a few years ago, and his newest book is called Poverty by America. It's free to the public. You do need to register for it, but it'll be on October the 17th at 7 p.m. And there is a reception that it does cost money to go to the 5:30 reception, but attendance to see Matthew Desmond is free. So I just want to make everyone aware.
That's great. Back to this retreat, it says retreat, it's really going to be a work session, so there's no spa treatment part of this. Sorry.
Oh my goodness.
Now I'm rethinking my attendance.
No, we should put a
All right.
That would be wonderful.
Smiley.
All right, any other, we've had 2 sessions of public comment. I'm just going to open it up if there's any other public comment on the, things that people brought to get in front of the committee today. It has been really great to have members of the public here in the meeting. Makes for a much more engaged session for all of us when we have real people in the room. And thanks to everybody who is online and listening in for your participation as well. Sasha, do we have any public comment from folks that was received virtually? Okay, well, given that, take a motion to adjourn.
Before we do that, can we just take a second and acknowledge that Barry, this is your last meeting?
This is.
Just, I think everybody's grateful for all the work you've done as committee chairman, on your participation, and your efforts to actually build affordable housing in Asheville. So,
Thank you,
Yeah.
Barry.
with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, and thank you for that. Anybody want to vote on this? Let's adjourn. Say aye.
Motion.
Aye.
And thank you, Sasha, for all of their help today.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that.